Welcome to our webinar, The Colors of COVID-19 Town Hall, The Colors of COVID, Ethical Engagement of Minority Communities in Clinical Research. My name is Dr. Stephen Thomas, and I'll be one of your hosts today, along with my colleague, Mr. Omar Neal. How you doing, Omar?
Hey, I'm doing good, Dr. T. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. And guess what? We have a new sidekick with us, Omar. We have Isabel Duran from all the way out in sunny California. Hello, Isabel.
It is sunny out here, Stephen. Nice to see you. And Omar, I'm quite envious. He's all set up in with his mic and I forgot to put mine up. Sorry. He's looking too cool for work.
Whatever is mine's yours, Isabel. So just call it yours, okay?
Okay. So all right. We're having our audience join in. I just want to make sure that Meg can hear me. She's our technical support person in the background. Meg, just say hello if you can hear me.
You're good, Dr. T.
Okay, so let the folks in. And one of the first things that we want to do, this is going to be for all of the audience out there, as well as all of our panelists, is that we're going to find out and get a little pulse beat of where people are today with a word cloud. Meg, do you want to set the stage for this word cloud?
We are going to be sending a link in the chat, so please be looking for that, and you can pull up the word cloud. Just type in the word that comes to mind when you see the question.
And so that link will take you to the cloud, and you can have more than one word, but just one word at a time. And let me know when that link has been sent, Meg.
The link is in the chat now.
Okay, it's been sent. You can click on it or you can copy and paste it. And Meg, I'm going to go ahead and let you share as we watch this grow. And Omar and I and Isabel will set the stage for what's going to happen this evening. So anytime you can take over, Meg, and share that screen, your screen.
One moment.
Okay, so big news coming out of the Centers for Disease Control, Omar and Isabel. We can now, according to the CDC, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask outside.
It's good news, and I'm sure that people are really excited about that. It's also an incentive for people to get vaccinated, so that you can go out with pretty much the confidence that you will be pretty safe as long as you're outside, and also, being conscious of some level of social distancing as well.
And Isabel, I see folks.
Stephen.
Go ahead, Isabel.
I was going to say to Omar, I appreciate his optimism. I think the concern, and I've been having that conversation with different members of my different groups about how they are going to approach without mask, how they will feel with large groups of people. Is the trust factor there enough to believe that everybody else is vaccinated or that they have taken care to keep themselves safe? So can we all be approachable all together at the same time without the mask? It's going to raise, I think, still a lot of issues of hesitancy just at another plane. What do you think?
I think that, and that's a good observation, Isabel, but what I also know is this, is that we're going to do this gradually. People are not going to just, for the most part, just go out there. They're going to test the waters. They're going to operate with people basically that they know for the most part. But again, people need to have some socialization. I think that after having experienced a year of isolation, for our mental health and spiritual health, and just that being human, we need to be around people. And I think that the risk is outweighed by the benefit at this point.
Now let's encourage people. Come on, you can have more than one word, just one word at a time. Let's keep building this word cloud here. Well, I think that I saw the infographic, and I think people are scratching their heads, wanting to make sure they're doing the right thing. Nobody wants to get this far and end up at risk and getting infected. We're going to talk about that tonight, as well as the importance of the ongoing research activities, the clinical trials that are ongoing now and that will continue to go on as we learn more about this virus. And so with that, let's keep that word cloud there, but let's go ahead and have our first set of speakers, our panelists, to come to the stage. They can turn their cameras on as I call their name. Katrina Watkins, who's the Director of Clinical Operations at FHI Clinical. Turn your camera on. Dr. William Ashley, MD, Director of Cardiovascular and Neurosurgery and Chief of the Division of Neurointerventional Radiology at Sinai Hospital in Baltimore, LifeBridge. Turn your camera on, Doctor. And Claudia Christian, Senior Vice President of Global Clinical Operations at FHI Clinical. And Mr. Mike Brown, Dynamite Brown. He's the manager at the Shop Spa in Hyattsville and a certified community health worker by the state of Maryland and a founding member of our Health Advocates InReach and Research Project, HARE. And so go ahead and turn your cameras on. Let me just say this to Meg Jordan. Reach out to Mr. Fred Spry. He's trying to find his link. He's in the next panel, but go ahead and reach out and make sure he has what he needs. So before we take this off the screen, look at the cloud.
Hopeful.
Okay.
You know?
Claudia, let's just go around. Claudia, what do you see? What do you see?
I see some, positive words that are a little bit bigger, right? Hopeful keeps getting bigger and bigger, which is nice to see. Excited, relieved. That's nice. It's nice to see it coming out the other side.
Dr. Ashley, how about you? Put some meat on the bones here, what you see.
Well, I see hopeful too, but I see tired, and I have to agree with that. I think everyone is getting tired, and it is the end of the race, but we got to kind of keep pushing so that we don't lose ground just because we are so tired. So I think there's still a lot to think about as we get more and more people vaccinated. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Claudia?
Yeah. So, Latrina, what are you seeing here? I mean, I guess, I put exhausted, by the way, so I'll admit to what I put in there. But I'm glad to see exhausted got little.
Yeah, Claudia. So with the exhaustion, right? I think for me, I'm just excited and I'm ready. I'm excited that more and more people are getting vaccinated. To your point, Dr. T, the CDC announcement about people being able to go outside without a mask on. So I'm just ready. I'm ready to spend more time with my family. I'm ready to see my friends. So I'm excited that people are getting the vaccine, and I'm just ready for us all to kind of get back to some sense of normalcy.
Okay. Mr. Mike Brown's on the front line. People who sit in his chair come with all kind of attitudes and beliefs. Mr. Brown, what do you see here, and what to say to you, my friend?
I typed in on the chat. I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm definitely optimistic at the point that people are getting vaccinated. However, I see people on the daily that don't have the same views about getting vaccinated, and I'm cautious because those type of people are going to be the ones that we're going to end up holding on to our ankle, trying to pull them to do it, and it could cause the world to set back again, which I'm very much so looking forward to reopening, and just the hesitancy in that causes me to be cautiously optimistic.
Well, let me just say this to you, Mike, and all of us. Let's both salute and give you some claps, because your presence on the news tonight was right on time. And you know how they edit you. You never know what they're going to leave on the editing room floor, right, Omar?
Absolutely.
But the tagline from Dynamite was, "We all want to live." That's what they said. We all want to live. We just want to live. And that really resonated.
I think, though, Dr. Thomas, that some people are emerging from this COVID oppression very slowly and very cautiously, which is why I say that there's that uncertainty. And so you don't, you have to recognize there are geographical differences and responses. There are micro community responses. It depends on how hard they were hit, who they are, where they live. what kind of support systems they had going through all of this. So I very cautious about saying that there's this general feeling. I think we're at different levels of feeling, and some of that depends on our status, depends on the luxury of how we've been able to work and to work safely. So I'm a tad more cautious, though I'm excited that we have moved towards this place. But I do believe there are still, and Mike said it to some extent, we still have to pull people with us. We still have to be concerned about that fear. There's still fear there, or that sense of not being part of the whole. And I think about Latino essential workers, farm workers who still feel that fear government oppression, fear anybody giving them money to get a vaccine in their minds is actually a bad government paying them to do something bad. So we cannot be overly cautious in our messaging without thinking about broadly the messages we have to send out to the various communities so they know we hear them. They know we are aware of them.
Indeed. And we've seen challenges with the messaging. So Meg, let's come on back to the full Hollywood Squares. Thank you, panelists.
You know, one of the things that I want to say as well, Dr. T, is, and Meg, Isabel touched on it. There is a politicization process that's going on too, that we have to deal with. There are people who associate wearing a mask with your political affiliation. And until we can really debunk that and really put that in another space, because many of the people who espouse not wearing a mask are the people who've already gotten their vaccine, right? Vaccination, right? So I think what we need to do is say, did you get your vaccination? Then why are you telling me not to get one?
Well, it is about a conversation. Go ahead, Harry, close. And when you, and Harry, just give a little thumbnail as you introduce yourself, your title, background. Go ahead, Harry.
I'm Dr. Harry Close. I'm the national president of the National Funeral Directors Association. We're in about 22 different countries, 5,000 funeral homes. And I just was saying, death has no political affiliation. And I do agree that many times those who are coming from various communities overstep those in the inner city, those Black and brown communities, and then they want to use their political process to stop in that process. But this disease, as all my colleagues, the distinguished panel know, has affected everyone in the world. And for those who have taken it not to encourage someone, it's kind of foolish. And I want to let you know that I've been dealing with my members. I talked to someone today that works in a hospital, that's a funeral director, and I still couldn't understand why she didn't take the vaccine. And I said, well, give me some rationale why you're not taking it. So my approach is a one-on-one, as many of us are that are on this panel. And, it's common sense. It's a common sense issue. And if we lose common sense, let me make it even plainer than that. And sometimes you make it plain.
So along the way, in addition to the vaccine, is the need for people to be part of the research that will help us get out of this situation. In fact, it was the clinical trials that helped us finally get the vaccines that we do have. And there are current clinical trials ongoing right now. So we're very pleased to have FHI Clinical as our sponsor for tonight, and to set the stage for what is a clinical trial and why is it important for people of color to be participants in clinical trials. Claudia, you want to start us out there?
Sure. So I think we know what is a clinical trial, right? So a clinical trial, there is just a way for us to study a product, a therapy or a vaccine, by putting it out in a very controlled environment with a very controlled way of doing that study, right? That's been reviewed and approved by an ethics committee, an IRB, what we call here in the US. So it's something that's very well constructed, very well watched over. And it's a way for us to be able to get that product out to a select number of people that meet a certain criteria to enter the study, so that we can measure if that treatment or that vaccine is working, if it's safe, right? and both that it's working, which we call efficacy, and if it's safe, right? If it's causing no harm. So the idea of clinical trials, generally, people don't think about this, but it can really go the gamut from, it starts off in very small groups of people with healthy volunteers, and then it goes all the way to large groups of people that are actually suffering from the condition that we're trying to treat. But every step of the way, it's very carefully mentored and monitored, and the data that we get from that is only good if all of us participate, right? If there's a good representation of our societies, of our communities. So not only is it important for us, for Black and Brown people, to participate in research so that we have an opportunity to be part of finding that solution, but it's important for us because we're actually giving back to our own communities by capturing the data that's then going to speak to whether that product is safe and works in our population. Latrina, I was actually going to ask, did I miss anything on that? Because I know usually when I go back and forth in that.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job covering it, Claudia. I think that what's important for our communities to understand is results of clinical trials and the way that medicines work in our bodies. It is definitely different across all ethnic groups. So you have to be a part of the research so that when we are getting prescribed medications by our physicians, we have confidence and we know that, okay, we had representation in this trial. They have a better idea of how it's going to work in my community because we are disproportionately, affected by a lot of illnesses and conditions. So we have to be a part of the research so that we can get the right high blood pressure medication prescribed to us, or we can get the right chemotherapy so that it will support and benefit our communities, because without it, the information is kind of one-sided. So we have to make sure that it is evenly distributed and the participations represents everybody or those populations that are affected by those illnesses and conditions. So,
well, I am just so glad that the two of you are here because we're going to, Dr. Ashley, we're going to go behind the one-way mirror and take a look at a scenario where someone is being recruited for a clinical trial. And so we want to just let the audience know this is a scenario. And we're going to deconstruct it on the other side. We have experts here to tell us, what did you see that was done right? Was anything done wrong? And for Isabella and Omar, who don't live in this space, I'm really going to be interested in what you think about the process. So I want you all out there to cross your fingers for me, because when I start clicking on things,
you also need to do a disclaimer because there may be some disturbing scenes that may upset some individuals. So be mindful that this is an actual scenario, and so be mindful that it may be upsetting to some people.
Okay. I want you to, first of all, verify to me that you can see a full screen.
We can see.
Here we go. The sound will kick in shortly.
William Green is a 65-year-old African-American man with 3 grown children. For 15 years, he worked on the loading dock at the local Walmart, but was laid off after suffering a non-work-related back injury. Eventually, he found work as a security guard at a bank, but he currently has no health insurance. 1 year ago, Mr. Green noticed blood in his urine, but initially he was too embarrassed to mention the problem to anyone. After a few weeks, he began to feel pain on urination and went to the emergency room. At the emergency room, Mr. Green received a hurried examination and was given a prescription for antibiotics. After a week on the antibiotics, he returned to the ER since there had been no change in his symptoms. At the emergency room, he received a prescription for a second type of antibiotic. Once again, Mr. Green saw no improvement in his condition and returned to the ER. A third doctor suggested that he undergo a cystoscopy. It took Mr. Green 2 months to save up the $750 for the procedure, which revealed cancerous cells, and subsequent work has revealed bladder cancer. Today, Mr. Green will meet with an oncologist who would like to enroll him in a clinical trial to study the effects of a new cancer drug used in combination with the current standard 2-drug treatment combination.
Mr. Green, unfortunately, with the late diagnosis that you have, it has limited our options for how we can treat this. But what I can offer you is we do have a clinical trial that we've just begun that I'm researching at this point, where we have a 3-drug therapy. I really believe this would be your best option at this point.
Wait a minute, don't you have anything positive to tell me? I mean,
I'm sorry, unfortunately, at this point, we're not looking that this is something that could be curable, but what we can do is hopefully arrest its development.
Doc, I've been through hell. You know, this thing started a year ago. I scared the death out of me with blood coming out of my urine.
I've realized
Too embarrassed to talk to my wife
that,
about it.
Unfortunately, with the delay that you had in seeking treatment.
I went to the emergency room 3 separate occasions. The first time I stayed there 2 hours and waited for a doctor who spent less than 10 minutes with me. Took a urine sample and sent me on my way. It was like I wasn't even there. A week later, I'm still bleeding. I go back to the emergency room. I wait another 2 hours. The doctor doesn't stay as long as the first one.
I understand. I have read.
Tell me this, doctor.
Mr. Green, I have read your chart.
I go back a 3rd time, then they tell me I gotta have some cystoscopy or whatever the thing is.
Cystoscopy.
Why can't I have the surgery?
At this point, the surgery would not be something that would be beneficial to you. This clinical trial that I am doing now, we are hoping to look at a 3-drug therapy that will address the problem from another angle. Normally we do only a 2-drug therapy. That's what's standard now. But we're hoping that this 3rd drug therapy will come at it from a different angle, and that although we can't cure the cancer at this point, we could prolong your life, arrest its development a bit.
Prolong my life?
Yes.
What are you telling me? I can't have the surgery, so what are my chances without the surgery?
On average, with the standard 2-drug therapy at this point, we're looking at 9 months. But what I would like you to take a look at is this information I have on the clinical trial that we are starting. Now, the one thing that we do need to be aware of is whether or not you are diabetic. Do you have any history of diabetes in your family, or do you know that you are diabetic yourself?
No, I don't.
Okay. That would be our first step, that we would have you tested for diabetes. If you are diabetic, that would eliminate you from the possibility of joining this trial. But that's where we would like to start. So what I would like to do is set up an appointment with my nurse out in the waiting area so that we can start this right away, get you in the loop, and get you started here.
I got to talk to my kids about this. I mean,
Mr. Green, obviously you're aware that time is of the essence.
Yeah, I know, and I know you don't have a lot of time. I know you're a big man, and I see all the people following you around. You're very important, but what?
Okay, scholars, just write down the very first thing that comes to mind. I want Joy Toro to turn your camera on. Harry Close.
Hold on, we need to talk to Dr. Ashley first. Make sure that he has a response to that. We didn't get a chance to talk to him.
Dr. Ashley's being quiet, but we gave now we came into your world, Dr. Ashley, into the hospital setting.
Right. No, I think this is an example. So hopefully this is not the real way that these kinds of interactions are happening. But the whole host of problems that began when the gentleman first hit the emergency department, and some of the issues there have to go back to advocacy and understanding how to navigate the healthcare system, and that's why we are often behind the 8 ball before we start. With respect to that particular discussion, there were no real discussions of alternative. The physicians seemed quite pushy. There was no consent. There was no discussion of second opinions, which would be a reasonable course of action in this case. Ultimately, the handful of days it's going to take to decide isn't going to make a difference when he's already been waiting around for a year. I think that this example points out kind of all of the points within the medical excursion that patients who are disenfranchised, patients who don't get the same care as some other groups, this group of disparate kind of care, we see it at every single step, from the timing to the testing, to the evaluations, to the financial piece where we're waiting for, a long time to pay for some test. All of these things are a problem. And he could have been admitted to the hospital and gotten the tests right then and there on his second or even third, trip to the hospital. So I think this is just a great example of everything you shouldn't see in an interaction, not the least of which is this whole idea of consent for this kind of community.
So we have people out in the audience, and you can use your Q&A to respond and share your thoughts. Dr. Cook, turn your camera on. Yolanda, turn yours on. Joy, Harry, close. So let me go to
Dr. T. I just got to say, I can't hold it anymore.
Okay.
Dr. Ashley hit them all, but I see lack of the standard of care, unequal care, implicit bias, lack of compassion and navigation, coercion, and lack of consent.
And all those things are red flags.
All of them. All the
and I think when we're talking about this, the reason why we put this example up was to talk about what not to do, and to give us an opportunity to really delve into areas that may be the reason for hesitancy for clinical trials. Because if you're not treating me properly when I'm going for my treatment, what make me think you're going to be treating me fine for that? Dr. Ashley, go ahead.
So yeah, I meant to bring it up before, but we got lost. But it comes up again here. One of the big issues with hesitancy in clinical trials for us is the idea that we get experimented upon, and then the development, the cure, the progress is imparted upon a different group, right? And so this example really hammers this home. He has had this thing for a year and is faced with a death sentence kind of diagnosis. But instead of working on his cure, we're asking him about a cure that will not help him in any way, shape, or form. Instead, it may help another group. And so this idea that we're disenfranchised from the cure has been borne out across history for us, certainly. And I think that really plays a role in why people are not so interested. And we saw that even with wearing masks and wanting to social distance for those of us who live in communities where we aren't going to be able to avoid COVID anyway. And so this is a pervasive problem.
So Omar said finding out what not to do. Now we have Yolanda, Dr. Yolanda, Dr. Tuesday Cook. This is your world in that clinical setting, people coming in for care, being recruited to a trial. You can tell us this is rare, this never happens, what we just saw, or these are things we have to fix and why we have to label them. And now you see what it looks like. Dr. Cook?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I think Dr. Ashley actually really hit the nail on the head very well. From the beginning, being seen in the emergency department all the way to the disparate treatment. I don't want to repeat anything that he said, but I think he put it very succinctly. in terms of disenfranchised people don't get the care that other people get. I think it's a very plain statement. You know, one of the things that I found, and I cannot say that this does not happen. I've seen it happen. I've heard it happen. I've seen patients after they've seen physicians or PAs or nurse practitioners or whoever they've seen and have these kinds of interactions, and so chose to get a second opinion because they were smart enough to do that. They understood that that was an option, and everyone doesn't understand it's an option, but some patients, once they feel something is not right, it's often not right, and they will seek someone who they know will treat them as a person, understands them from a different background, that they trust. And that's why it's important to, once you engender that trust, to maintain that trust. I think that, you know, from a informed consent standpoint, you know, it's not a patriarchal thing. You can't tell somebody to do this and this is what you have and this is all it is. You really have to get down and go up to whatever level at which they lay and show them. You know, I have patients who come in who are, you know, who have a middle school education, but will understand when I print out an article and go through it in simple terms. They understand, well, oh, what percentage is this? What percentage is that? I mean, basic things. And when they ask their questions, when you explain it to them at the level at which they understand, it's easier for them to make a choice, you know, and it really is about choice. You know, you don't want your hand forced because you can't afford something. You don't want your hand forced because you're just scared about dying. You know, when he said, well, the days, you know, I have to speak to my children, he has to speak to his children. You encourage him to bring his children in. They may have a different level of education. They are going to be his support throughout whatever treatment he gets. You let them come on in and you have a discussion with the family. You know, there's so many things that we do, again, for other groups that sometimes we don't get. The interdisciplinary group talks. You know, you don't want just this one person telling you what to do. Why isn't that person having a discussion with the pathologist and the surgeon and the primary care doc and giving him options, giving him websites to look, printing out something and saying, take this home, read it, bring it back, we'll talk again, call me, you know, call me this evening after you've had a chance, after you talk to your children, you show it to your children, let's go through it again. Let me talk to you another, because when people hear cancer or any diagnosis that's chronic, sometimes they need a minute to digest it. And we don't get that minute. You heard him say, I know you're important. You don't have time for me being followed around by big groups. You have to make sure that patient understands, no matter who follows me around, you are the person that I'm speaking to right now, right here. You are what matters right now. And any kind of education, any options you need to discuss, we're going to discuss it. So, you know, I mean, I don't want to repeat what Dr. Ashley said.
That's
I absolutely 100% agree with him, but there's a sense of humanity that people need to feel in order to trust the people who say, well, this is a clinical trial.
Right.
We're building.
Joy, let me bring Joy.
Just before you go to Joy, we need to hear from Yolanda. And then Joy, this is her space, is going to tell us how FHI Clinical does it differently, what they do. But Yolanda?
Sure, great. So many real takeaways from the case study. I think, you know, the whole issue, which I've spoken to this group before, about even once you're able to access the healthcare system, the quality of care that's received once you get into the healthcare system, being dismissed from the ER multiple times when you're showing up for blood in your urine, right at the offset, was clear to me he didn't receive quality care during his times in the ER. But also thinking about him as a human being, I felt in watching that he was treated less than a human being. The provider, the doctor, was not listening to him. He was blaming him. He was condescending, paternalistic in terms of feeling he was more important. And so sometimes it's just really important for us to make sure that the patients are aware that in that moment, they are the most important persons to us as we're sitting there and we're providing care to them. But I think this builds up lots of issues related to mistrust and patients not feeling like they are able to trust providers in a way that they can participate in the clinical trial. And so it's repeated experiences with this type of care. So by the time they show up for a clinical trial, it's not just that one interaction that they're having with you, it's all of the interactions that they have had up to that point that failed to meet them as a human being. So I'll just stop there. It's a lot to talk about in this case. But
Okay, well, we the night's early. Omar?
Yeah.
You're
What
go-
I
you're
wanted
gonna
to
throw
do,
it
I
to
wanted
Joy.
to bring Joy on
Yeah, there
because,
you go.
because, interestingly enough, there are groups that are more amenable to clinical trials, right? And I kind of want to know, because you've looked at this in a lot of ways, what relationship do they have with the healthcare system that may be different from other people, and how can we get that kind of assurance that, as Dr. Ashley say, that they are not just being in clinical trials to help someone else, but also to help themselves?
Yeah, so what we've seen is that people have, and this is generally across the board, when they have a relationship, a trust of their doctor, and or it can be someone in their family that has said, I had a good experience. Just having that trust there is very key. A lot of people who participate in clinical research, if they were feeling hesitant beforehand, they feel more inclined to participate after being educated about the research. And as Dr. Cook was saying, it just takes a moment to break it down in simple terms. But on average, people want to participate. We hear a lot about our communities not wanting to do research, but that's only a very small bit of the story. Because when you hear about that the research was either brought into the communities or conducted by trusted community members, people in their neighborhood, churches, then people across the board are more likely to participate in clinical research. But the reason why we really need to have these very honest and truthful conversations is because we are looking at an example of something that is very real. And we also have to think about the dynamic between the patient, or in the clinical trial, the participant and the doctor. There is that unseen power dynamic just in our culture. And then in this situation, this was a Black man and a white man, and there was also the power dynamic of the racial undertone and the situational undertone as well. So it's really important to have that cultural sensitivity. And we see that in a lot of the sites that we do work with. But this is just a great area to educate the general public, just to see why it can be a challenge at times.
So
Let me just add one more thing to this, the question.
Sure.
Does seeing people who look like you presenting information, does that make a difference, Joy?
I think it definitely helps. It definitely helps. I wouldn't say it's the end all be all.
Okay.
Because I feel like it comes down to trust in your community. So if someone in your community hasn't looked like you, but has been around your community for the past 20 years, always showing up, you can count on them, that's trust. Because we've seen a time in history as well, and present, sometimes people are used that look like you who don't necessarily have your best intentions. So it's really about that relationship.
Trust is the base, is the foundational word.
And let me just say this, Joy, just tell the audience who you are.
Sure. So I am at FHI Clinical as well with my colleagues, Katrina and Claudia, who you met earlier. And my role at FHI Clinical is to bring on site networks for our clinical research, and also oversight of our expert team.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Cook.
I wanted to point out one small thing that Ms. Toro actually alluded to, with the people who don't look like you in your community, but if they're there and they always show up, then you tend to develop that trust. What I thought was interesting is, sometimes I'll have patients who stay with the person that they're with because they said, well, they're a doctor, so they know more than me, so I don't want to ask questions, I'll just do what they say. But what I also want to bring up is the fact that I wonder how much time he would have spent with someone who didn't speak English, someone who was Latinx, or, Filipino, or, spoke only Igbo or Yoruba, how was he going to spend time then to explain this that he didn't even want to explain to someone for whom English was their first language? How was he going to do that? It's mind-boggling, but it's not unusual and it's not uncommon. So it's something that we really need to address.
Okay.
Can I follow up on, if I may?
Yeah, Harry, close, and then Isabel. Go ahead, Harry.
Okay, the real thing, this particular example really hit home to me. In 2005, I gave my oldest son a kidney. I'm a living donor. I won't name the hospital, but they nicked my small intestines. I was in the hospital for 9 months. I had insurance. My insurance was dropped. And when I went and they asked me to come into a clinical, the first thing they questioned, well, you have no insurance. This is what we'll do for you. And I said, wait a minute, I'll pay out my pocket because I have only one body. And thank God I had two professions, a professor of two colleges, and owned a funeral home. So I was able still to participate because of the trust factor, as my colleagues have said. We sometimes forget, my first response when I saw this was, wow, no bedside manner, didn't listen, and we're all in a listening business. Even though we might not have the patient, if you just listen, you might find out how we could deal with something differently. So I would love, when I used to teach at 2 other universities, I love to talk to physicians, say, may I help you help yourself? Because apparently you missed something when you went into ethics in school. So I appreciate the opportunity to share on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And talk about ethics, Isabel.
Oh, I think that that's actually crucial to engagement with humans, right? You want to feel embraced, respected, welcomed. And these are many things, and particularly adding on the language barrier, you're not going to feel any of those things. And that was one of the things that stuck out to me the most with our patient example, was he didn't feel listened to and he felt disrespected. Already that's a pushback. Now let's go back to the Pfizer COVID clinical trials we had, because I actually interviewed one of the lead researchers in bringing in recruitment for the COVID trials, and there was 10% African American engagement and 13% stateside of Latinos. And the thing that they discovered, interestingly enough, which we've been telling them for 2 decades, I think, how to recruit in our communities, they touched base with their site researchers, who then turned and got in touch with community-based organizations and community influencers, who then turned to the community and invited them in with appropriate educational materials and navigation in the right languages with the right cultural understanding. And that to me is humane care. And if you don't send those messages out from the very beginning, at the very top, you're never going to be able to build what I say is trustworthiness to trust. Because there is that bridge, that trustworthiness bridge, before you're going to get to trust. And no matter, I'm not going to go to bed tonight without thinking of that man and how badly he was treated. It just boggles my mind. And then you add in the language barrier, and think about the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of members in our communities who do not feel respected the minute they walk into the hospital or clinical office.
Yes, and so Isabel, I want to just say something to Omar. This theme of trust is now looming big, and you needed to see what we need to fix, so that when we talk about the fix, we can appreciate it. So that's why I want Dr. Quinn to turn her camera on, Katrina, Dr. Ritter, and we're going to continue this conversation. But this is all about trust. It's all about building trust. And so you guys have been watching, okay? And Omar, let's give them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we're going to open this whole thing up.
Let's start with Katrina. Katrina, if you could introduce yourself. And then I want to just ask you, what was your take on it? And how do you, because you are out there and you're trying to influence or encourage people, or at least give people information about getting the COVID vaccine. How do you now take this information with confidence that you can do that and influence the people that you're talking to.
And introduce yourself to the audience.
Hello, my name is Katrina Randolph. I am a certified community health worker through the state of Maryland. I'm also part of the hair program, and I'm also a licensed cosmetologist in the state of Maryland. Looking at the video, I see why there's so much distrust in the healthcare system. Me being able to advocate for my clients, I think I would just encourage them to, when you meet a doctor that you're not getting what you need from them, it's always other doctors out there that you can try. I think you should always get second opinions because they're always necessary. You can't always go on what you hear the first time around. So for me, I'll just support them, encourage them. When you're dissatisfied with the results that you get from one doctor to the next, just make sure you follow up and do your research and find you a doctor that you're comfortable with and a doctor that that you trust, because it's all about the trust at the forefront. If you can't trust a doctor, you don't want to be doing no clinical trials.
How do we get to, thanks, Katrina, Dr. Quinn, how do we get to this trust factor? I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time. How do we get to trust? Tell me what's your thoughts. Introduce yourself and then tell us what your thoughts about trust.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandra Quinn. I'm professor and chair of the Department of Family Science and School of Public Health here at University of Maryland, senior associate director of the Maryland Center for Health Equity. This is like this, as they say, the $64,000 question. I think part of where we've made mistakes along the way many times is that for many years, too many years, the kind of discussion that went on was, what is wrong with Black and Brown communities that they don't want to participate? Now, quite honestly, when you look at clinical research across the board, it's not as if we have overwhelming participation by any group. But for much of the time it was, well, why are they distrustful? Why don't they want to participate? And what Dr. Thomas and I did, in fact, what you saw in this video with Mr. Green was part of a training program for researchers, because what we did is we flipped it on its head and we said, number one, let's ask Latino and African American people, and we did a national survey just of those people, and said, what would motivate you to participate in research, what kinds of things? And what we found is people weren't being asked, number one. Number two, that altruism and the motivation to make a difference for family or future generations of their family was a powerful motivator for people, but they were worried. So what do we do about trust? I think, Omar, number one is we got to train researchers, because yes, we've seen, doctors like that. And yes, we have system problems. So from, bias training in addressing racism in healthcare to training researchers to really begin to have dialogues. Be ready for people to say, I don't trust what you say. What about Tuskegee? I've heard that so many times. But you got to be ready to have those conversations. And what I find is when you can do that, you can get to a different place. Isabel is right. I serve on one of the expert panels for the COVID Prevention Network. And that network oversaw these worked with the sponsors of these ongoing trials. And they did a lot of community education, but they also had to do research education as well for how to reach out and build trusting relationships. So it's not so much about, to me, it's not, how do we get Black and Brown communities to trust researchers? It's how do we get healthcare systems and clinical researchers to be more trustworthy?
That's good. Let me go to Joy. Can I bring Joy back up? I'm going to bring Joy back up now. Joy, if you can enable, because, that particular physician makes your job hard. Tell us what FHI Clinical does differently. That is the antithesis of what we saw in the Mr. Green tape?
Yes, so with FHI Clinical, historically, we've worked internationally. And so just going abroad, oftentimes being many Americans going abroad can also have that same outlook of hierarchy. And so it's very important when we go to different countries to have that respect for persons, that beneficence that we see that should be carried out in all clinical trials. And so we've been very well versed in community engagement, community advisory boards. And so when COVID hit, a lot of our work shifted to the US, and we were able to apply what we're doing abroad right here at home in the US. And so while the video that we saw was just the worst example, which you don't want to do, at FHI Clinical, I know we have many site partners, many that I have engaged with and reached out to myself, who are doing exactly the items that all of our panelists have mentioned are the right things to do. And many of them are involved in the community, have site networks that are open on hours that are just not your 9 to 5, but are open in the evening or in the weekend. So it addresses those barriers to participation in clinical research. And then just showing up in the community, having making sure, of course, like the informed consent outreaches in the local languages. So there are many things like that. And I'll say too, just being today with FHI Clinical, being able to have this platform that was sponsored, I think also shows a big step towards the conversation. If we know the problem, but can't have a truthful, honest conversation about it, then really what are we doing? We have to be able to talk about it in order to be able to address the problem. But I'm really happy that we have many site networks who are very engaged and are doing the right thing, have been part of many of the vaccine trials that have been able to recruit for COVID research.
So Omar, I'm thinking that let's open up this conversation. Meg, go ahead and turn everybody's cameras on. If you're out there, go ahead and turn your cameras on. They should be active. And we're here in the Hollywood Squares, all on one screen. And Mike, you are watching all this. We brought you into a part of the world, the clinical world, that maybe you hadn't seen before. And yet you, Katrina, Fred, and your clients are the very folks who would benefit potentially from participating in a clinical trial. And so what questions do you have? What questions do you think your clients might have as part of this discussion?
Definitely the clients, well, I can say for myself as well, when we first started this journey, I was skeptical of the vaccine. I didn't want to participate in the clinical trials as well. My take on it was that it was too fast. Warp plus speed cannot equal cure. I was uneducated on the scientific facts that are proven by it. But once you start taking the blinders off your eye and take a different position to see what's really going on, you can come up with a different opinion, and which I did. Everybody was saying that they don't want to be a guinea pig, and it's that guinea pig part of being in the clinical trials that it makes the people who come in, at least the people who come into our establishment, it makes them feel like you're trying something out on me. You don't know what it's going to do, which they have a point. They have a point somewhat, but if you can look into the research, I think you can come up with a different approach.
You know, I think that you're right, Mike, but in addition to that, but I think Dr. Ashley is correct when he was saying that people, if they feel that they're going to be the beneficiary of the research after you get the either therapeutic or the vaccine, then they're more apt. But if they think you're just using them to create something that they will not benefit from afterwards, may be a problem. I want to go to Dr. Carol Ritter, and because we not talked to you much, and we got to bring you in because you're there talking to patients all the time. How do you establish trust? And is this a real issue as a barrier to people participating in clinical trials?
Yes, thank you. It's very confusing, and it probably showed up because you probably saw my name show up in the word cloud. How confused is that? It was interesting because I've been bouncing around back and forth since this J&J thing happened a couple weeks ago. So the trust with my patients has shifted. I mean, they trusted me, and then I was giving J&J, and all of a sudden, oh my God, Dr. Ritter gave me J&J. You know, can I trust her again? And can I trust myself? I mean, honestly, it's a very interesting time, and the medical literacy is what I'm having trouble with. You talk about language, right? You know, they came out and said, you know, 6 women and 6 million had this unusual clot, and then they stopped the J&J, and then they took 10 days, and then they came back out and said 15 women in 7 million got the clot, and they brought it back. So, you know, what does that say so the relative risk to my patient that I'm sitting in front of to the absolute risk that the FDA told us, you know, the risk benefit to society is they put the J&J back on the market. So, you know, it's this trust thing is very, very fragile, even if you think you've developed it, because we are an ongoing research project, all of us here on the ground. So I'm hearing that from my patients. They want to do more research. So honestly, I understand that because I want to do more research too. And but we're very privileged here in the United States because we have 3 vaccines that we can choose now amongst them. And, you know, our country is trying to help India, they're in survival mode. They have different questions of trust right now. And our government is actually giving vaccines to India that they won't give to us, AstraZeneca. So, I mean, it's a very confusing time for trust. You know, it's a relative trust that we're in right now.
You know, Dr. Ashley, you know,
Omar, can I get
go ahead. Who?
It's Isabel.
Yeah, Isabel, go ahead.
One of the things that I think, and because Katrina popped in, who's a community health worker, I think that one of our bridges are community health workers. I believe in utilizing them. Isn't Mike a certified community health worker?
Mike is indeed. Mike is indeed.
These are our people on the ground. These are, these are our boots on the ground. These are the people who have day-to-day interaction in our communities, who are seen, have the cultural references, the lived experiences, and once trained can really share in a clear and understandable way a method of explaining to the community. Back in 2009, we hosted in the Spanish-speaking community a whole day session on clinical trials. Did they say they didn't want to participate once we actually educated them? No, in fact, they were all eager. But what we also asked them was, what would get in the way of your participation? And this is where the system fails to respond. Is this going to stigmatize me? Can I tell my colleagues at work? Will you give me a note for my boss so I can take the time off if I have to? Who's going to pay for my childcare while I'm at that, you know, in that research project? There are so many small but everyday issues that need to be addressed in order to make that bridge into that trial. For the Latino community, it is also about undocumented and insured. If you don't have insurance, you can't join a clinical trial. I've already said to the FDA, you need to change that regulation if you want some communities of color to participate, and they don't allow the undocumented to participate. You need to change that regulation if you want part of our community to participate, who can add to a real body of robust research given their environments, et cetera, et cetera. So I still believe that the community-based organizations on the ground are that bridge, who bring those community health workers trained and ready to create that intersection between academia, research organizations, clinics, healthcare systems, cancer comprehensive centers. They are the bridge.
And what I think is
Good for you,
important
Mike.
also,
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
what I want to just point out is what I think also is the communication in groups, because a lot of people don't know how to ask a question, or they don't know what question to ask, or they're too embarrassed to ask the question. So a one-on-one is good, but a group communication is even better, because we learn from each other what questions that we have that we didn't even know we had. And it's really important for communities to talk together.
And to that point, Carol, there is a support system right there. It's a safety valve, and you're allowed to ask what you said. This is pretty stupid, but somebody else might say, I wanted to know that too. And so it becomes a safe place to have that conversation and to get to answers and to disabuse people of that misinformation. We have found this all the time when we do community health education around breast and cervical and prostate and colorectal cancer. If people want to know, they are hungry for information. And once they get it, they cross over. They're willing to take those next steps.
So Isabella, you threw the ball and acknowledged Katrina as a community health worker. I want to thank you for that. That's not always done in terms of the workers on that front line. And Mike in his shop. Mike, you actually have materials in your shop right now for people to participate in research. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
And just
Absolutely.
say, look, and have people been pulling off the materials and signing up?
Absolutely. They've been on the Eureka app. They're getting on the Eureka app. We just have everything here for the clients that come in.
So if you would see his wall there, and these are social science research, survey research, apps that ask about your exposure to COVID. Those are different than the kind of trial you saw Mr. Green being recruited to, dealing with cancer. So let's bring people along gradually. Focus groups, semi-structured interviews. In fact, when we did focus groups out in the barbershop, they were asking, well, when are we going to meet again? And so all of a sudden you get a whole different kind of esprit de corps. And Dr. Quinn, have you seen that as well as a way of bringing people along?
Well, I think that's, I think Katrina, Mike, Fred, and Isabel's right. Community health workers and getting out to where people are. We also have long had, Joy mentioned community advisory boards. We've long had a community research advisory board that also, has their own networks and becomes ambassadors for research, but also ambassadors for health promotion and other activities. I think once we get out there and begin to have conversations with people, we become less scary, and they become, they feel more confident asking questions, and it's a relationship. It's building a relationship.
Right.
With respect that has to happen.
The best disinfectant is sunlight.
And that's why we bring the health professionals into the barbershop.
And so when we have these conversations, and Dr. Ashley, I want you to join me as well. And I want you and Dr. Cook to kind of bounce over this thing. You all have been thrust, the medical industry has been thrust into the spotlight. I mean, the COVID did that. I mean, so all of the dirty laundry, all of the things that you may have been aware of that were gone basically unaddressed are now out there. How do you systemically make the change so that people can trust you? Isabel said something that was critically important. How can you become trustworthy? And then let us begin to look at trusting.
So I guess I'll answer this one first. To be honest, there are a couple of things I think come from your question. The first one is all of the dirty laundry has been aired. That laundry has been dirty and shoved in the basket for more than 400 years. And the fact that it's been aired now is great. But but we still have a lot of work to do with addressing the systemic problems that exist, not only on a physician level, but on a hospital administration level, on a advanced provider level. You know, in places with more of us, why are there not enough physicians there, and their care is being done by people who don't have the same credentials? Their care is being given by people who have not spent years or decades in training. So, I mean, I have issues with a lot of things. Why are people getting bonuses when physicians are crying for PPE? You know, there are a lot of things that need to be addressed with this dirty laundry. But honestly, from a personal standpoint, having trained at Howard for both medical school and residency, I have not changed anything in my practice. I have been treating my patients the same since Dr. LaSalle Lafall, you know, taught me to examine a patient when I was in medical school, you know, in the 90s. So and my patients are patients who were at Freedman's Hospital. My patients are patients who have been disenfranchised their entire lives in DC, or came from Prince George's County to Howard because they knew that we understood them and would take care of them in a particular way. And one thing that I was happy to stay at Howard for residency, again, because I felt that I would get the training I needed for the people I wanted to train, to treat. And, you know, one of the things that we say at Howard, many of my surgical attendings, was that, you know, you can go out and get more training and do your fellowship other places, et cetera, but just make sure that you also use your expertise for your people. And I'm happy to treat everyone. I treat all my patients the same. You know, people who are of European descent, people who are of African descent or Indian descent. And so I have not changed much. And that's what really does engender trust. I think someone, maybe Isabel, said, you know, I think it was Joy Toro who said, you remain in a community, you show up, you treat them as they need to be treated, and then you know, things go smoothly. Sometimes you have to talk to people in a way that they get it and say, hey, don't bring that here. And they understand, or sometimes you have to use your education and all your degrees and say, okay, well, listen to me. This is what I'm telling you, here are the papers, here's the data, specificity, and what's statistically significant. And then some people respond to that. Again, it really depends on the patient that you're treating. But that dirty laundry, I think what I would change, I wouldn't change it because I call out the physicians that I see that are doing the wrong thing. And I will give them a call if a patient felt a certain way, because it's important for us to make sure that our colleagues know how our patients feel, or that we know that something was different in the manner of treatment, or what was offered as a treatment option for one patient versus another. So, those are still things that I do and will do, but I think now that people understand that implicit bias exists and that they should take their own test and find out where they lie or what they may be doing that they weren't aware of before. Now people are being made aware. And I think it's important to not only bring our colleagues up, but also evaluate how the system can change.
So Dr. Ashley, and after your Dr. Ashley comments, we're gonna show you a culturally tailored kind of messaging communication strategy. But we all saw the Journal of American Medical Association get dinged when they said there was no such thing as racism, institutional racism in medicine. That happened within the past 2 weeks. Dr. Ashley, you're muted, brother. There you go.
Thank you. Well, I think Dr. Cook did, covered it, right? The idea that the lessons learned when training at Howard, that kind of gets back to this idea of concordance in some way, shape, or form. You learn this and not racial concordance so much as cultural concordance. And that can be obtained and practiced by anyone, but those lessons come from stuff like that. And I didn't go to Howard, but I felt like I did because both my parents did. And I heard the stories of Dr. LaFall walking up and down the aisles from when they were there in the 60s. So those things teach you about being in the community and talking to the community, talking to people in a way that they understand. And it's the same when you're in the hospital, talking to everyone in the hospital, which doesn't often happen. So, and patients see that kind of thing. So you develop trust, and they understand that they may not even agree with you, but they trust you. And then you can kind of speak the truth to them. I think the other thing about this systemic racism is it certainly exists. The fact that someone would deny it is an even more powerful indication that it does exist. And when we think about bringing people into research, bringing people into getting vaccinations, we've got to help folks believe that what they're getting into is safe and carefully thought out. So in addition to like all the patient side, we want people to be in research, but we have to think about whether the research is actually done well. So being on the other side, I sit on some of the panels that have set up the stroke research for this, for Maryland. And there was one study that was brought out by some large groups to do some testing, and they hadn't thought of consent in any way, shape, or form in a way that was reasonable. And you would imagine that they would have. But I brought it up, and it led to the whole thing being, thrown out and redone. And I think if we don't have people in positions that are really carefully thinking about those things, even if we do have people's best interest at heart, we still may be getting people into situations that aren't as fair, equitable, carefully planned. And so I think that there's a lot more dirty laundry than just one side. There's a whole nother basket of different colors. The whites, and the blacks, the blues, the browns, all the laundry of different colors be cleaned up.
And so, Omar, COVID has given an opportunity for demonstrating cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, cultural relevance. And so I think COVID has opened up a door for us to do a much better job around recruitment and education for clinical trials in our community. And in this group here, we talked about the need to work on the language, like the whole issue around herd immunity versus community immunity. And so I want you all to take some pride in the fact that things are changing. And so we want to, you can adjust your volume on your end, but this is one of the new culturally tailored messaging, communication platforms for communities of color. Omar, just confirm, do you see a full screen there?
Full screen.
Okay, here we go. Adjust your sound, colleagues. Here we go.
Got the vaccine, you got the vaccine, they got the vaccine, we got the vaccine. We can get back to normal, let me inform you, let's all get the vaccine. It's about community immunity. I'm talking unity for you and me. Yeah. If Doc says it's good, trust me, it's good. Now let's all get the vaccine.
Hip Hop Doc.
What to do, Dr. Mo?
It's a SOS, we gotta let the folks know.
They believe that the vaccine is bad for you,
but we looked at the data and it just ain't true.
When I got the shot, it kinda felt like the flu.
Shoot, that's much better than the ICU.
The shot's pretty safe, but the Rona is cruel.
It could make you sick, could be the end of you.
It's vaccine or bust, but there's a lot of mistrust.
Cause the system is racist, that's the main basis.
But face it, the numbers don't lie.
We gotta survive and save black and brown lives.
We need community immunity to fight from within.
We need 8 out of 10 to get it in for the win.
To protect and defend and hug your mom again.
Cover your grin, let the healing begin.
All right, give them some snaps. Give them some snaps. See, things are happening. And if that can happen around COVID, it can happen around improving education and outreach around clinical trials.
Yeah. One of the things that happened, and I want you to know that does make a difference. Bernice Frazier, who is the director of Macon County Health Care Authority, as well as the facilitator for the Macon Cares COVID-19 Task Force in Tuskegee, Alabama, saw that video and changed the name from herd immunity as the way that they talked about it to community immunity, and made it formal to do that. And then also chastise people when they don't do that. So I want you to know that we can come up with many different ways to get the message out. But I think the clarity is what we're talking about, that we're clear, that we're honest, that we're trying to figure it out, and the things that we don't know, we'll share with you. The things that we do know, we'll absolutely share with you as well. And I think that's what it's going to take in order to get people comfortable enough to be a participant in clinical trials.
So Omar, we got some people out there with questions, and Isabel, I'm gonna let you. I'm just gonna set Meg up
because otherwise my 74-year-old brain is.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
Need to take on Omar that to some extent we're still putting it on to community. Into the system, make them change because they're not serving our community. So, as an example, I sit on what is called the Center for Regenerative Medicine in the state of California, which is all about stem cells. And a year and a half ago, I came onto the board, and shortly after COVID hit us, and they started putting out a $5 million grant proposals to see how they could use stem cells in COVID research. And one of the things that I asked them to do was that all of the applications had to include what their plan was to recruit proportionally ethnic and racial minorities, given that they were being the hardest hit by COVID. So it made plenty of logical sense to me. But we now required them to propose that, to show the plan. And it was part of the scoring system. So that was put into policy. And we've now spread it throughout the different levels of research that we fund. That is huge because too many times researchers check the box and then don't do anything. And nobody holds them to account from the NIH down. So I think that we, wherever we sit and in every which way we can have impact on changes in policies from within, be it academia, be it at the pharma level, be it within, healthcare systems, we need to push and not always expect that the only people with the solution are out in our streets.
So Omar, can you believe how time has flown? We're down to the last 14, 15 minutes, and we need for these folks to give us their takeaway. What are you taking away? And telling FHI Clinical, I hope this is a beginning and not an end, not a one and done, but a start of using this platform to actually educate our community and keep this conversation going. So if there's a takeaway, Dr. Ritter, what's the takeaway from today?
Keep communicating and keep educating each other. This is a very good platform for me. And particularly, I send these YouTubes out to people who I have this much time to talk about in the office, and they're sitting there and they're nervous and they're only hearing 50% of if that, and they're by themselves. And most of the time they're like in a gown, and it's talk about a power dynamic, right? You can't do this in the office. So these kind of YouTubes, I send them out to patients afterwards and I say, don't make your decision now, but watch this and then think about it and then we'll retalk. So thank you for continuing to have these conversations.
And Omar, I'm just doing Hollywood Squares. You're gonna the moderators will go last. But Joy, what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway?
Well, there are a few takeaways about the communication, but for me, it was just continuing to be educated myself, because even though we do a lot of things correctly, I know that we're still more to do. And so, as you said, Dr. T, this is just a beginning. And when I was prepping for this town hall, I spoke with one of our site colleagues, Van Johnson, over at Benchmark Research, and he let me know about this diversity site assessment tool that just came out only about 3 weeks ago. And going back to what Isabel had mentioned, it's a great tool from what I can see, as far as sites have to really look at what they're doing for diversity. However, at the same time, you just want to make sure they're not just checking a box. But I'm interested in delving into that more and seeing what we can do at FHI Clinical to make our questionnaires more robust when we bring in sites. So this for me has been definitely about education and continuing the dialogue.
Very good. And everyone who registered will be sending out resources and background information. So thank you for registering. Harry Close, Reverend Harry Close, what's the take home?
Well, I really have two. One, as funeral directors, we touch our entire community in a year and a half. And so I'm very interested in exploring how we can get our funeral homes to be certified health workers, because really we deal with people at the most vulnerable time. We're the most trusted in our community beyond the ministers. And then as a pastor of a church, to look at the religious community, because we actually touch those communities. And no matter what your faith, what your political process, when death comes, as I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, it has no political perspective. And then this, Isabel, I'm going to be using one of your terms of humane care. And I think that just touches base. But I've been taking so many notes. But I will promise you to my colleagues on it, I have a whole bunch of notes that I'll be putting in a letter, and I will give you the quote that I'm going to be quoting you. And Dr. Ashley, we have a good friend of ours that talked about you, and it's a pleasure to know that you're not that far from me. And just want to thank this opportunity to Omar and Dr. T and Isabel. You were excellent today.
I want the audience to know we're going to be, when we post this on YouTube, we'll have a link and also address some of your questions. Some of your questions have been answered in the course of the conversation. We'll answer more online. Claudia, what's the take home?
So, I was thinking as I was, getting ready for the take home, and I was thinking about how we just can't over communicate right now. We have to try all the different possible ways, and we have to stay present, right? It's not a helicopter type exercise. We have to be here because we've been here and we're going to be here. But then, I really think when Isabel said push, that became my take home. And that's what I wrote down. I'm like, each of us are in a position to actually affect change and to make something happen, right? So we should all be, Dr. Frazier's and figure out how to take something that we're learning here by spending this time together and actually do something with it that's going to have a more lasting impact. So I think that's what I learned tonight, was to push. So thanks, Isabel.
If you push with love, you come back with a hug. And Reverend Close, I think having a session like this just with your funeral directors and morticians would be another way that we reach your audience. I love the idea of bringing them in and training them as community health workers. That makes a whole lot of sense. Dr. Yolanda, take home.
Yeah, I loved when Dr. Cook said we've aired all the dirty laundry. And now we need to do the work. Yeah. And as a community engaged researcher at University of Maryland, I think very often we engage communities when it's time to implement or time to really do the clinical trial. And I think we really need to do the work to build community power, to break down power dynamics between physicians and other providers and their patients. And we really need to engage community early as a prerequisite to our ideas about research, and then engage them in a continuous manner as we think about implementation, as we implement the work that we're doing, and even through dissemination, giving them ownership of data and being transparent about what we were successful with and what were our failures. So lots of, I think, still dirty laundry to air, but still lots of work to do as well.
And we've got some detergent that can get the dirt out and bring the bright colors back as well, because we're creating citizen scientists. And that's what's happening out in the barbershops and salons. They're enrolling people in our citizen science initiative and bringing them as co-creators of the research. Latrina, what's the take-home message?
I heard, can you hear me? I heard Dr. Yolanda over there, and I said, yes, that is what I took away. I was thinking we need better community engagement. It all boiled down to that. Even hearing Isabel say, with the Pfizer trial, they did the research, they understood the sites they were recruiting, and they went out to the community and they put the proper things in place to open up the communication in the community. So I take that away. And those are the type of conversations that, I bring up when I'm speaking to a pharma company about study design. Like, how are we going to operationalize this so that it will improve diversity in your trial? So community engagement is huge. And we have to do our part, and we'll continue to do our part as FHI Clinical to drive that message home to our clients.
Well, you know, I said Latrina and Katrina's heard it rhyme. Katrina, go ahead, turn your camera on. You're next, Katrina Randolph.
For me, it's continuing to learn and educate yourself, being able to take this information and share it with your community, because it's in the community where you build these trust and relationships. So just taking all this informative information and being able to share.
And Katrina is enrolling people in citizen science and enrolling people in our focus group. So these are actual places where we're doing recruitment to a study. It's a social science study, but nonetheless, it's an on-ramp. It's a beginning. It's a start. I want to thank both of them so very much. Mike Brown, you're up next in the Hollywood Square. What's the take-home message, brother?
I think my take-home is going to be humility. As a community healthcare worker, to my clients who I've been servicing for years, they're scared. They're scared. They're apprehensive. They're not trusting. I'm going to say humility, because we have to fit the shape of the container in order to get the message to them. And some of them are kind of angry and fighting for their non-factual basis on why they won't get vaccinated. So being humble, meeting them where they are, and continuing to push the information to them, the factual information to them, it takes a sense of humility. So I'm going to go with humility to do it.
Okay, humility. Dr. Tuesday Cook, what's the take-home message from tonight?
I think the take-home message is it's good to feel positive about the future. And I'm glad that people are feeling this way. And I think in order for us to continue feeling this way, there are several things that we have to do. One is to know that 15 out of almost 7 million people is a very small percentage. It's not statistically significant, but it is still scary. And I can see how that pushed us back on people getting the vaccination. And I think that we still have to push forward with getting it. However you can get it, there are too many that are being wasted currently. And there was a very small percentage that was actually sent to our own communities. So if other people are actually getting it sent to their communities in high percentages, and we're not getting it, that alone should tell you something. Doors aren't clamoring anymore, and there are other people now having vaccine hesitancy that are not us. And I think that's because we are working towards educating our own to make sure that we have the real science behind it. So please don't let up on encouraging your family members and your friends who I'm sure have had people in their families or their communities die. Please don't let up on getting your vaccine so that we can continue to feel hopeful and move forward. And two, don't stop on fighting systemic racism. Get up in anything you're in, any board you can sit on. Anybody asks you to do something, you say yes. Write to your senators, write to your council people, write to your governor, write to everyone to keep it moving forward, because it's not only in healthcare, it's everywhere. And we need everybody with boots on the ground to address it.
So let me tell the audience, we'll run over just a little bit, but it's going to be worth it. Dr. Ashley, what's the take-home message from tonight?
You know, I think just keep pushing forward. You know, we have to keep up this fight in all different arenas. And I think this group helps everyone understand how much the community is an actual player. You know, they need a box up on this Hollywood Squares. And it's a big group, but they need to feel empowered to participate in this process. And that's going to help all of us and all the people who are working towards those goals to figure out what to do for the people who need it. And so I think we got to tell people information, but, you know, encourage them to be a part of their own process.
Okay. Okay. Very, very good. Dr. Quinn, what's the take-home message from the night, Dr. Quinn?
Well, the first one is ditto to everything that's been said. So that's the first one. But I think there's another part that's very specific to COVID, is that we're still just over a year into this. There's much research to be done yet, both related to vaccines, related to long haul, people who experience long haul symptoms. So it's both needing to keep up the work and the pressure on the investigators so that they can do a better job at becoming trustworthy partners for communities, and for us to stay close to communities through our community health workers and partnerships, so that they understand why this ongoing research is going to save lives ultimately.
And when you are research, when you participate in research, you also have some say. You have some say, and the more you learn about these things, and you can be empowered when you're in those conversations. We want to minimize what we saw happen with Mr. Green, and we can do that by these conversations right here. Isabella Duran, what is the take-home message from tonight?
Nothing about us without us.
All right. That's a bumper sticker. We got another t-shirt.
I love that. But let me say, we're in a moment in which community can own its own destiny, in which we do have power. We just have to recognize it. And those of us who know that can help activate it. I've heard that a number of times here. In whatever way we can help to activate it, I will disagree with the word empower. I think of it as very patriarchal. People have the power. We just have to activate it. You saw the vote. We just have to activate it. That's what it is.
Omar loves that, don't you? Don't you, Omar?
Why? Don't give away what I'm going to do, man. Please. Go.
Okay, let me just say this. We're going to show the audience, we're going to take the audience out with another one of these culturally tailored communication packages so they can see it. And interesting enough, Dr. Yolanda, some people had only seen that piece you just saw when they were in our webinar. It's not on TV. You don't see it running on TV. So we've got to be the ones to give this information to our community. And so I want that audience to hang in there with us. And Omar, since we're going to go out on that video, you want to come on the other side and take us home?
I can take you home early or take you home late. But I will take you home.
Well, let's do this. It's a short one. And again, another tool for people to use because it will be in the recording. So I cross your fingers here. Every time I go out, stuff can happen. And again, add this to your work. And look at the theme. I got the vaccine. Hold on. I want you to look at the different themes that are raised, the cultural relevance. Here we go. Buckle your seatbelt, adjust your sound on your end. Here we go.
I got the vaccine, you got the vaccine, they got the vaccine, we got the vaccine. We can get back to normal, let me inform you, let's all get the vaccine. It's about community immunity. I'm talking unity for you and me. If Doc says it's good, then trust me, it's good. Now let's all get the vaccine. All right. Trust me, believe me, we're not gonna have another Tuskegee. This ain't eugenics. No way. Nobody getting away with hiding information today. Got the FDA, CDC, black doctors and experts for you and me. There's a whole lot of data for the world is free. Do me a favor, check it out and you'll see. I gotta give a shout out to all of those involved that's helping us get this problem solved. People wanna know, is the vaccine safe? It doesn't have anything to do with race. 9 out of 10 people won't get sick. That's 90% effective and legit. We gotta act now. Please don't wait. Get the vaccine before it's too late. For real.
You want to talk about creativity? Come on now, give up some snaps for those folks. What and we just need to make sure more of our community sees this. So Omar, you are the master communicator. What is the take-home message from tonight?
The first thing I want to do is give a wonderful kudos to everybody on this panel. You all were incredible. I appreciate you sharing your truth. We all have some truth. We are all possessors of some truth. And as we bring our truths together, then and only then do we get closer to the truth. But I'd like to leave this evening with a message from the Queen of Soul, the late Aretha Franklin, when she says RESPECT, find out what it means to me. That's what we are really talking about today. Respect. And what we have done, even in airing our dirty laundry, is respectful to the people that we're seeking truth. We're trying to find a way to create a system that is worthy of your trust. Let me give you just one thing that just happened in just the last 2 weeks. The state of Alabama has required that every police officer that wears a badge and carry a gun goes through implicit bias training. Now, in Alabama, they have decided that the first class in this training I will teach next month on the 21st. That's progress. As we began to reimagine law enforcement, let us reimagine the medical industry as well, so that we can be trustworthy. As always, I like to leave you with these 2 words. Remember that I love you with a perfect love, but more importantly, remember this: you got the power.
You got the power. Okay, people, wear your masks, wash your hands, and stay away from crowds. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you.